RTFC was created because it filled an absolutely essential need at the time it came into being. There was no non-act purpose financing available to over 1,000 rural telecommunications entities. It was available nowhere. And because of the efforts of RTFC, not only is it available through RTFC, but it is beginning to become available from other sources. RTFC paved the way to assuring that rural telecommunications needs will be met throughout the country, no matter where.
The year was 1985, and the telecommunications industry was changing fast. The business-friendly policies of the Reagan administration released a flood of capital that helped accelerate the nation's telecom evolution and paved the way for the dot-com revolution of the 90s. Technological innovations in telecommunications were rapidly coming to market. The incorporation of fiber optics, cellular telecommunications, and digital switching into the network enabled an array of new services. Rural telcos desperately needed capital in order to take advantage of this explosion in new technologies. Although many of these new products were being rolled out in urban areas around the country, limited financing from REA and the Rural Telephone Bank, coupled with statutory restrictions on the use of loan funds, hindered rural development.
What brought all this about, what brought these problems about, was the fact that we were, as an industry, entering a new era, an era of deregulation, an era of direct frontal competition for telecommunications services.
Back in the mid-'80s, there was a burgeoning of new technologies. There was a lot of merger activities, a lot of acquisition activities, which REA couldn't participate in. The local banks were not really interested in long-term loans. And so I guess our thought process, our incentive, was to serve the people we were serving in rural areas, and then to provide an alternative funding source, the local banks, for those activities and facilities that the telephone industry was interested in, that they couldn't participate in.
The movement to deregulate the utility industries was proving to be a double-edged sword. It opened up new business opportunities for smaller rural utilities, such as the independent telcos, both the cooperatives and the commercial companies, at a time when they were in need of significant additional capital in order to remain competitive in this new environment.
In the early 80s, 1981, it began to be possible in the communications business to do things that were non-regulated. In other words, outside of the regulated telephone industry. And Southland got very much interested in that, and we started several different things. We started Southland Systems in 1981, and it did reselling of long distance. We started Southland FiberNet, which built a fiber optics cable along the Gulf Coast. We started Southland Mobilecom, and that is a company which handles cellular radio and paging, and of course we had the old regulated telephone business. Now, one of our big problems when we first started getting into these things, they all were new, and the bankers didn't know anything about them, and REA couldn't lend money for them. And we had a very, very difficult time trying to raise money for our unregulated activities.
It was clear that rural telecom companies were going to have to look beyond their local banks and the federal government for funding.
We needed to go elsewhere, and of course, one of the first places we looked was the National Rural Utilities Cooperative Finance Corporation, because our older brothers in the electrics had built this organization and adapted it to their needs, adapted to the directions they were going, had the ability to govern it and guide it and provide any type of service where feasibility could be established. And this is what we needed, and this is what we wanted. And so about 19 the early 80s, 1982 to 1985, we began discussions, initially informally, with Governor Gill of the CFC, and telling him that we had needs, and he recognized the needs. Governor Gill saw immediately what we were looking for.
I think we felt strongly that we had to have telephone people involvement in the decision process, the policy making of the organization. That's why we set up a separate corporation.
So it was that in 1987, a new member-owned financial corporation dedicated to serving rural utilities was established, the Rural Telephone Finance Cooperative, RTFC.
They understood the situation, and they were able to have a board at the time that believed that there was a future there for not only the rural telephone industry, but for CFC and its branch RTFC, which was formed a little later. So they were very open-minded about it, and the rural telephone industry was able to show that there was a need there and it was going to be a win-win situation.
I think our relationships and our knowledge of rural areas helped us a great deal in formulating the cooperation and working with the telephone systems.
The beauty of the rural telephone finance cooperative was the fact that it was bringing the telephones together now as co-ops and as commercial companies, bringing them together to form this new organization, which now would be available to them for all their rural telecommunications financing needs.
One of the primary objectives of the newly created RTFC was to take advantage of the new REA lien accommodations, which made financing available to rural telcos for non-act purposes. With increasing pressures for small telcos to gear up in order to remain competitive, these crucial funds came just in time.
Our company was a very small company, and we couldn't borrow money from anywhere basically, maybe our local bank to buy a pickup or to buy a ditching machine, and that had to be a 3-year loan at the most. And so whenever time came for us to put in fiber and put in a digital switch, there was nobody that would loan us any money because we were one of those small companies that fell through the cracks of the rules of all the federal money and all the other money that was there. So yes, without that, without our TFC coming forward, without the Rural Telephone Finance Group coming forward, companies like ours would probably be out of business before now.
The timeliness of RTFC arriving on the scene in the late 80s to provide longer-term financing for emerging technologies proved to be a boon for telcos across the country.
Early on in RTFC's development, we had the opportunity to become involved with several rural companies in their development of their cellular build-outs. As that business evolved, we had the opportunity to work with more and more companies in blanketing the rural areas in cellular service.
The driving force was that our world was changing, and the existing banking institute wasn't changing with the world at that time. And there was some time delay. It was not in a rapid fashion that you needed capital, that you could obtain that from that of the government. There was a lot of red tape. And in the demand that we had from our customers, for instance, in the early days, there was the need of capital to deploy fiber optics, to carrier transport, to connect schools together for interactive TV, and even to that of the wireless world, the cellular. And RTFC was available to provide capital in a timely, responsive manner. And that's why the demand of our customers expected those services, and to roll them out, we needed additional capital, and that's why we went to RTFC.
I think the benefits of RTFC's approach in its interaction with the members is the timeliness, the ease of talking to someone, the availability to see someone and discuss a subject or a matter and getting it resolved. Just a couple weeks ago, I brought somebody over here that was in another meeting and put them with your person, and they met for 30 minutes and got their issue worked out. To try to do that with another lender would be impossible.
Pocalembra was an REA borrower, exclusively REA borrower, and but we created a structure where the telephone cooperative was the holding company, but we created a subsidiary to allow us to be in the ventures with cellular and with fiber optics, and later with DBS. And we were able to initially capitalize the subsidiary and to start in the business. But as the capital demands were greater and the REA mortgage was so restrictive on the amount of money that we could invest in our own subsidiary, we could see we needed to access capital very quickly and have a relationship with somebody who understood our business and really understood what we were trying to do and how we were trying to bring these advanced services to these rural subscribers in West Texas that really could benefit from especially mobile communication. There was a huge need there. So we found RTFC, we had heard their promotion, we had heard their program, we listened to their representatives, and we started, and they were very responsive to us. They came to us, they allowed us initially to put up that letter of credit, that infamous letter of credit that was required by the FCC to prove that you had the capabilities to build the system and to operate the initial cellular network. And we were successful in doing that, built a good relationship there, and were able to establish a long-term relationship.
Later on, we started to work with companies on their cable TV operations. We got involved with a couple of the centralized equal access networks when they were developed.
In working with the board of Iowa Network Services in the very beginning, we started trying to seek out available capital, where to turn to pursue what we wanted to accomplish. And through that process, we felt like that REA was not someone that we could go to. The Rural Telephone Bank was not someone that we would qualify for a loan. And RTFC came on the scene in the late 80s, about the same time INS was formed, and we heard about the formation of RTFC, and we felt like that might be a lender that we would pursue to see if they were interested in a project such as Iowa Network Services. And luckily they agreed to a construction loan, and we were off and running.
The development of financing programs for rural telco ventures into new technologies was just part of the story of RTFC's early years. RTFC also provided acquisition financing to rural telcos.
Starting in the mid to late 1990s, we became significantly involved in the acquisition of rural property by small telephone companies. That property was generally made available by US West and by General Telephone, and it presented an interesting opportunity for small companies in the rural area to expand their service territory and improve the quality of service for those people who formerly were subscribers of US West or General Telephone.
10 years ago, we heard that GTE was probably going to sell their telephone property in the New England area. At that time, we were very interested because we were surrounded by those exchanges. So we put together a group to do that very thing, to buy the GTE property in the New England area. And we came to RTFC to get the financing for that. And we came in and had a meeting, and RTFC was able to help us with that whole thing. And as a result of that, Tidewater Telecom was born 10 years ago.
Looking back over the last 16 years, probably some of the most important accomplishments are the work that we did in helping rural companies acquire exchanges that were being sold by the RBOX and by General Telephone. Clearly, there are companies today that provide service to the rural community at levels of service and technology that simply would not have existed had the rural companies not had the opportunity to acquire these exchanges. And that's been a big part of the business that we've done over the years. And I think it was significant for the companies that we had the opportunity to work with.
Ever since its inception, RTFC has maintained strong ties with the major national telecommunications organizations, NTCA, USTA, and OPASTCO, as well as a myriad of other telco groups. The knowledge, experience, and support gained through these associations has played a crucial role in RTFC's success.
We always had our annual meeting either with Opasco or NTCA at one of their meetings, and they were kind enough to let us do that because we wanted to show a close association. We wanted to give the telephone people an opportunity to be part of that grouping. So that was a basis for it. I think any organization, particularly Telephone Cooperative Association, has to have the involvement of the people involved, or else it doesn't work.
There was good relationship and interaction between that of RTFC and the three major national associations, that being USTA, Opasco, and NTCA. And even RTFC's administrative staff even served on some of these boards, these national boards. And that's the way it should be. Lending institutes as associate members should be active on these national boards. They complement these boards. And likewise, I think that USTA, Opasco, and NTCA encourages that and wants that input. It gives a balance. It gives input what the board of directors need to hear while they attend these meetings. So it was a blessing to have that interaction between that of RTFC and the three national associations.
With its mission of dedication to the nation's rural telcos, RTFC's membership has grown to more than 500 telecommunications companies across the country. RTFC remains the leading private sector lender to the rural telecom industry, and the future looks very bright indeed.
I see RTFC's role being even more important than it's been in the past, because with all the competitors that are in the industry and all the new services, and an example is VoIP, and what's going to ride on that, who's going to fund it, where's the revenue going to come from, and all the competitors, you're going to need to be able to turn your money around rather fast, and you're going to need people like RTFC and with the board members that are very knowledgeable of what's going on in the industry in order for rural America to continue to be the leaders in the development of all these technologies.
The uniqueness of RTFC comes from, I think, the nature of its organization. It's the only lender to telephone industry that's solely owned or solely controlled by the telephone group, dedicated solely to lending to that telephone group and no one else. So they have a unique position of knowing the industry, being dedicated to that industry, being a cooperative. So its uniqueness stems from its cooperative nature and the involvement in the industry.
I think that RTFC does their homework, and they advise. I mean, they're not just a lender. They look at viable business plans. They look at where the industry's headed. They have a huge amount of professionalism. They have a huge amount of expertise, and they're readily available to share that with a potential borrower, and I think that's worked.
I think that they have filled a void that was there in the very beginning because of the buildup and the need of capital as technology advanced so rapidly in the 80s and 90s that brought along all of these relationships that mushroomed into a fundamental approach to financing a telco.
I think that RTFC is important to the rural telephone companies because they need a lender that understands their business and that is willing to work with them as a partner and build a relationship.
I've always felt if I had a problem, I could call somebody up here and get an answer, and that's, I'm come from a cooperative, and my customers come through the door and see me if they want to, and I feel like I can do that here anytime I want to, and that's different than any other lending agency I've dealt with.
I think the RTFC is unique because it has very specialized staff who understand, are closely related to, travel to, interrelate to the rural telecommunications organizations themselves. They are there. It's that expertise, that willingness, that spirit of mission, and that overall attitude, which really makes a difference.
For RTFC, it's all about commitment. It's about our commitment to our member systems so that they can fulfill their commitment to their subscribers. We know that the business environment will change. We know that there will be change in technology. We know that there will be change in the regulatory environment. But what is important is that we support our members as they provide high-quality service to those people who live in rural America, so that people who do live in rural America have access to the very same quality of life, the very same economic opportunities that exist in any of America's urban areas.